Welcome to the live session of our online Skills for Bridging the Divide workshop. So today we're going to be learning and practicing skills to have more productive conversations across a polarized divide. So let's take a look at the agenda that we're going to be using for today. So we're going to start out with an orientation, just including some background ideas that you should have in mind while you're conducting these conversations. We'll also have some tone setting skills that really help you to set up a productive conversation. Make sure that you're both in it for the right reasons. There'll be a getting to know you exercise where you're going to meet your practice partner that you're going to be practicing the skills with for the rest of the workshop. And then we will do a listening skills presentation. We'll have a demo for that. We'll set up the practice, and then we'll come back and process that together. And we're actually going to be using the same process for the speaking skills. We'll also talk about handling difficult moments, because those often do come up in these conversations. And then we'll have a wrap up that includes an evaluation and a checkout question where we can reflect on what we took away from today's work. So let's start out with the orientation. We're going to cover the goals for our conversations, the expectations that we may have to abandon of how those conversations are going to be carried out, some core principles for you to keep in mind as you practice, and then finally some cautions about when and how to use these skills. So I want to start with a goal, with the goals for the workshop itself, since we really want to have intention in our mind for what we're doing. So we're going to lay out some goals for today, and then we'll talk about the goals for using the skills in the real world. So for this workshop, our first goal is to understand what it takes to have constructive, non-polarizing conversations across political differences. We're also going to learn the skills needed for these types of conversations. And then we definitely want to be motivated to have these conversations with friends, family, colleagues, and others in the community. These conversations are so important for us to continue to have. So I want to also look at the goals for the conversations themselves. So when you are practicing these skills, especially in the real world, keep in mind that your goal is to learn about the perspectives, feelings, and experiences of people from a different political viewpoint. We really want to be engaging in these conversations with the goal of understanding someone. You should also try to get a sense of satisfaction about how you conveyed your own perspective, feelings, and experiences, right? We all want to be heard. And then we also want to focus on discovering some common ground if it's there. You should always keep your eyes peeled for this. And then there are some expectations that you may have to abandon when you're practicing these conversations. You may have expectations that are unrealistic for these conversations. So the first one is that you can persuade others to change their core attitudes and beliefs, right? Particularly in the course of one conversation, that's not going to happen. And even over the course of several, it really, if we want to be influential, which, of course, most of us do, it really takes a relationship of trust and the willingness to actually listen to the other person's perspective in order to help them understand your own. We also have to abandon the expectation that facts are going to be agreed upon and logic is going to be followed consistently. We all know that we exist in a media environment that is quite atomized, especially with social media. We're all seeing a different set of facts, right? And so it's important to recognize that the reality that you exist in is slightly different from the reality that everyone else on Earth exists in, right? And so we should keep in mind our narrow, relatively narrow perspective that's part of the human condition. And then finally, abandon the expectation that your conversation partner is going to match your openness, right? So attending a Braver Angels workshop does give you an advantage that others in the world won't necessarily have. And so you may need to work a little bit harder to strive for openness. So let's take a look at some core principles of Braver Angels and our approach to having these difficult conversations. So first of all, respect, curiosity, and openness tend to elicit the same from the other person. We really want you to lead by example, okay? Second, everyone needs to save face, right? No one wants to be portrayed as stupid, blind, narrowly self-serving, bigoted. And when we're confronted with those sorts of accusations, our our self-image is threatened, and it can feel as dangerous as it does when our physical safety is threatened. It actually triggers the amygdala, just like with our fight and flight response, just like is triggered with physical safety being threatened. And so we want to give people some space to exist in a world that's very complex. And then finally, most people in a relationship are going to have some common values and concerns that can be unearthed. So it's really important to lean into the commonalities that you're finding and mention them when you see them. And then finally, there's some cautions about using these skills in real life political discussions. Okay, so first of all, timing is really key. Okay, so start at a calm moment, not when someone's just fired off a verbal shot or is in mid rant. Okay, we also want you to know your partner. Only try this with someone that you think might actually want to hear your point of view. If you haven't seen any evidence from them in the past that they are curious about other people's perspectives, then maybe that's not the person to start with as you're practicing these skills. And practice one-to-one first. Group conversations can be so much harder. It is really tough to control the dynamic and to really focus in on the body language and signals that one other person is sending you. And in a related note, be extra careful when using these skills online, right? You shouldn't go to Facebook or Twitter to try using the skills for the first time in the real world, since it's so hard to control the tone, and especially because of all the people who chime in. Right. So we don't discourage you from trying to use these skills when you're in a tough conversation online, but when you're really trying to practice them and internalize them for the first time, it's probably not the best place to try to do that. So now we're going to talk about setting the tone. The conversations you're going to be having with your partners today are practice, right? They're meant to help you learn a new set of listening and speaking skills, and you'll be helping them to do the same. But in real life, we don't always have these discussions with a willing partner who tries to help us learn to listen and speak constructively. So these tone setting skills are particularly important to learn as you're practicing the skills in real life situations. So the first principle is let the other person know that you want to understand other perspectives. Okay, so that may sound like this. I'm finding myself curious these days about the views of people who are different from the people I tend to hang out with. Okay. And that really telegraphs to that person that this is the reason that you're in that conversation. And also ask permission to pose questions. So you want to put the ball in their court and make sure that they feel like they have some agency, some control over that conversation. So it might sound like, can I ask you something about politics or your views? Or can I ask what people in your part of the country are saying about what's going on in Washington these days, right? You can also acknowledge your own political stance. And I think that this really signals self-awareness and the fact that you recognize that your perspective is only one of many, right? So it could sound like this. As you probably know, I am a conservative, I'm a progressive, liberal, libertarian, whatever identity that you might hold. And you don't have to stick to every part of that identity, but you might want to signal that has been influential upon you. And so that's the perspective that you come from. And you recognize once again that is only one perspective. And then also offering something critical of your own side or crediting something positive on the other side, right? So for example, if you're a blue, you might say, I think Democrats have been out of touch with a lot of people in rural communities and Rust Belt towns. And the Republican Party picked up on that. Or if you're a red, you could say something like, I think conservatives come across like they don't care about minorities. Liberals have done a better job of connecting with minority groups. What we're going to do now is move on to our listening skills. So when you have the participant guide in front of you, as we chatted you that guide, so that link is in the chat. So it's the listening skills tip sheet that's really that you can follow along with. And so that'll give you some specific approaches to this, some hints to help you, some do's and don'ts. And also there's going to be a talking points for actors in the participant guide as well. We'll show you when that is going to be relevant for you. So let's take a look at these listening skills. They're to really listen in a way that allows you to hear what the other person is saying and make them feel heard, right? So the first skill for this is paraphrasing. Okay, we want you to always be reflecting back what you hear from the other person. So repeat the essence of what you heard them say, and be careful. Don't suggest implications beyond what they've actually said. And to do that, it's really useful to listen for, yes, that's what I'm saying, before you proceed. Okay, so for example, a red might say, so for you, Trump is still a big threat to the country, or you're saying that government-backed health insurance is the best way to get medical coverage for everyone. Or a blue might say, so you're saying that you don't trust the federal government on healthcare, they'll mess it up, or you don't always like Trump's way of saying things, but he doesn't act like a traditional politician. Okay, so these are ways that you really want to get the essence of what they're saying to you. But also follow up with real and honest questions in order to better understand the other person's point of view, right? And it's important to really understand that we don't want you to be making gotcha questions, okay? And that can be harder than you might think. So, a gotcha question is one that has an assumption or even an accusation already baked into it, right? Something that the other person is going to take exception to. So it can really be helpful to ask how the other person came to their view, right? Stories are so important. They really humanize us. And so that's the basis of a good question. So here's a red example. Do you see Black Lives Matter helping or hurting things in our city? Rather than, do you see attacking the police as the solution? You see how that kind of had an accusation baked into it. Or from a blue perspective, what do you think of the criticism of recent election laws in Republican states that they'll keep some groups of eligible voters from being able to vote? Okay. And so a contrast would be, we don't want to ask it this way. Can't you see that the Republican voting laws are just racist attempts to suppress the votes of people of color? Right? There's an assumption, there's an accusation baked in there. Okay. Another red example, I'm interested in how you came to believe in single-payer healthcare. Or another blue example, how did you come to see the federal government as more the problem than the solution? Okay. And then make sure that after you ask that question and they talk about their experiences, acknowledge those experiences, right? Really validate that. So we also want you to listen for underlying personal views and aspirations and acknowledge those. Something like, I'm hearing that for you, fairness is a big issue when it comes to immigration, right? And what's interesting here is that we often have very similar values, but they're expressed differently based on our political leanings or those who we surround ourselves with. So for reds, when it comes to immigration, fairness might be related to those who waited years to come to the country legally. For blues, it might be that fairness is for the dreamers who were brought here by their parents and have grown up as Americans and don't know any other country, right? What I'm going to do now is going to share my screen again, so just to set up the practice a little bit first. In your participant guide, we're going to be looking at the listening skills tip sheet and the talking points for actors, okay? And that is going to be really important because you are often going to be paired with someone who may actually have a similar leaning to you. And so in order to help them practice, what you're going to be doing is using those talking points for the opposite side to really challenge them, okay? And so in a few minutes, we're going to be putting you back in the same group that you were in the getting to know you activity to practice those skills. And so when you get into your breakout room, it's important that you communicate to one another about what perspective is most challenging to you to talk to. And that is the perspective that the person who is serving as the actor is going to portray. Okay, so regardless of whether or not it agrees with their own views, they're gonna be portraying the role that challenges you most. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again now, and we'll take a look at what that practice is actually gonna look like. Okay, and with the help of Liz, are going to be going through a quick demo for what this is going to look like if the listeners, first of all, we're going to do the first demo based on if the listeners are both blue and the role player or actor is a red, okay? So in it, Carrie and I will be taking turns playing the person who is practicing the listening skills, and we're going to be holding, we have a blue object just to remind us which role that we're playing, while Liz is going to be playing the opposite color. She's going to be the actor, okay? So she has a red object. And so note for this demonstration, we have two blue listeners. So we're both going to be practicing the skills, all right? And so I'm going to start out as the blue listener. I'm going to start out the conversation by saying, I'm interested in what you think about this topic. And the two topics that you're going to choose from are either immigration or guns. Okay. And then Carrie, Liz, who's playing the red in this scenario, is going to reply using those red talking points. Okay. And then both of the listeners, both Carrie and myself, are going to listen closely. We're going to make our partner feel heard by taking turns using the skills such as paraphrasing, acknowledging, and then asking questions to clarify what we think that we hear. Okay. And then Liz, as the red actor, is going to continue responding with those red talking points. So we want to show you what that conversation might sound like. Okay. So Liz, I'm interested in what you think about immigration.
Well, you know, Randy, I worry that Americans are losing their jobs to illegal immigrants. And I'm not sure they should all be deported, but we've got to do something.
Oh, so your concern about immigration is around possible job loss for Americans, but you're not sure that deportation is the answer.
Yes, that's right. But it's not only job losses that concern me. I don't think we ought to be rewarding people with citizenship for coming illegally either.
So, Liz, it seems like you're saying it's a bit unfair to offer a path to citizenship to those who didn't come through the proper channels.
Yes, that's about right.
All right, great. And so what we're going to do is continue the conversation from there with we listeners using the skills and the actor pushing back, right? And in this exercise, we have two listeners to allow you to support each other as you try the new skills. So next, Carrie and I and Liz are gonna do a quick demo for what it would look like if the listeners were red and the speaker or actor is blue. Okay. And so now, because we're reversing roles, okay, so I'm going to hold up my red object, okay, and Carrie and I are going to be taking turns playing the person doing listening skills as red, and Liz is going to be acting and using the blue talking points, okay? So I'm going to be starting the conversation by saying I'm interested in what you think about immigration or gun issues, if you chose that topic, and then Liz is going to reply using the blue talking points. And we'll both listen closely, make her feel heard by taking turns using skills like paraphrasing, acknowledging, asking questions to clarify what we think we hear. And then Liz will continue responding with those blue talking points. So here is what that might sound like. So Liz, I'm interested in what you think about immigration.
Well, I worry about the undocumented immigrants in this country who contribute to society. They deserve a chance to stay here legally and not live in fear of deportation.
So your concern about immigration is that many illegal immigrants are productive contributors, so they should have some sort of path to stay here legally instead of being deported?
Yes, that's right. But it's not only deportation for new immigrants that concerns me. We shouldn't be deporting the dreamers who've grown up here and don't know any other home.
So it seems like you're saying it's a bit unfair to penalize the dreamers since they were brought here as kids.
Yes.
All right. And we'll continue the conversation from there, and the listeners are going to use the skills with the actor pushing back. All right. So here are your more specific instructions for the exercise in terms of how you manage the three of you in the breakout, right? So to start, the person whose first name comes first alphabetically, all right, is going to serve as the actor. Okay, and they should have the talking points from the participant guide in front of them. And the other two are going to be practicing the listening skills while the actor responds as someone of the opposite viewpoint. Okay, so the listeners are going to take turns, with paraphrasing, acknowledging, asking questions, going back and forth in conversation. And together, you want to choose a topic from the talking points. So either immigration or gun issues. And so as an example, Brian and Cassandra could be practicing the listening skills as blues, and Adam will be the actor using red talking points about the issue that you've chosen. And recognize you might not be representing your own color during this role playing, okay? And remember, the point is to practice the listening skills, not to present or debate the actual topic, right? So keep in mind that the actor should offer what we call measured pushback to help the listeners practice for real, right? After 7 minutes, you'll switch roles, and the new actor should review the talking points of a person of the opposite color while the new listeners have the tip sheet in front of them. So just to reinforce, it's really important that you be communicating with one another about the role that is most the perspective that's most challenging for you to converse with, right? So if you tend to lean a little bit blue, then tell the actor to play a red. If you tend to lean a little bit red, tell the actor to play a blue. All right, so the basic instructions for the conversation are in the chat box. And remember, if you get confused about how your conversation should be going, there is the ask for help button. So what we're going to do now is process what you learned in the practice. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and I'd love to have several people take turns answering. And so we're going to talk about first what went well, and then we'll talk about what was challenging. Okay, so we're going to treat those as separate questions. So, and also remember to unmute yourself to speak, and we'll have 5 minutes for this discussion. And so I'm going to stop my screen share, but who would like to answer what went well when you were practicing your skills? Who has a thought about something positive that they experienced in that skills practice? And hopefully somebody something went well for somebody that wants to talk about it. So eagerly waiting for a raised hand. And thank you, Lori. Please go ahead. What went well for you in the skills practice?
Well, I think for me, I'm very comfortable with the partners that I have in the room, so that made it very easy to be just a little vulnerable and uncertain. But I think from my point of view, being the actor and having a script was a little bit easier than being a listener, and so that part of it went really well for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, we definitely get some comments that it wasn't even the original intention of how we designed the workshop, but that people really benefited from embodying a different perspective, and so we love to hear that. And so hopefully you felt that that way for your as an actor, that was a benefit for you as well. All right. Any other comments? What skills did you all find that you were able to use effectively to make your partner feel heard? Does anyone want to comment on that? Yes, Tracy, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, we were talking about the importance of paraphrasing and just how like building that connection with someone is vital to making sure they see they're being valued and what they have to say is being acknowledged. So yeah, that was we were having a harder time with using the cues in the actor part. We kind of just wanted to wing it a little, but that to us was what we really circled back to. It was paraphrasing is very, very important.
Excellent. Well, that sounds great. I'm glad that you leaned into that. So Patricia, what did you find was effective for you? Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah. Well, it was challenging to decide whether to do the reflective listening on the content or the feelings. And sometimes I found it more effective to reflect back on how intense the feelings were, as opposed to focusing on the content. So being able to distinguish when to, and then not to parrot back, but to actually find the logical thread and give that back. But sometimes that logical thread is not important compared to the emotional thread. So being able to distinguish when to do what is in the moment is challenging.
Right. I think those are two great points. And definitely when we reflect back what we hear, sometimes it helps them to organize their thoughts and make sure that they're being clear, right? And that can be really effective. But your point about the emotion, I think, is so important, right? Because people really want to feel heard in terms of how they connect with an issue. So that's so important. Michael, go ahead and unmute yourself. What did you want to comment?
Thank you. I think Eileen in our group was the first to mention how almost unnatural it is to have a conversation that is one that can actually advance understanding and communications. How divorced it is from our reality at times, that that we face in local government, in which we're used to people being right in our face and wanting to advocate their views very quickly. So the skills aren't that difficult. It's applying the skills or having the timing. I think is going to be the ongoing challenges.
Definitely. And Nicole, we're going to give you the last word on this, and then we're going to go to more of the challenges. So unmute yourself. And what did you find went well?
Oh, thought we had jumped to challenges.
Oh yeah, we can definitely continue to challenge. You can kick off the discussion about what you thought was really challenging.
Well, maybe it's kind of a hybrid of both, so maybe this is a good segue.
Okay.
But what I thought was what I experienced in the role play was, as my listener was paraphrasing back, it sort of brought out stronger perspectives that, like, I hadn't led with my initial, like, the most, the things that I know are actually maybe the most polarizing. And the more I was receiving the paraphrasing, the more that wanted to come out. And I was like, but I actually thought, oh, that's kind of, is it good or is it dangerous that all of a sudden I'm like, and
right. Yeah. That paraphrasing can definitely help us to get to deeper in the issue. Right. And it can be, as we get deeper in those issues, it can be challenging, but at least there's a real connection there, right? At least we're sharing what we truly believe about the issue, which I think is really important. Brian, what do you think? Go ahead and unmute. What did you find particularly challenging?
Let me mention, he's the last one that you really have time for.
Okay, gotcha.
So real quickly, I just thought one of the challenges was, when I would paraphrase, there was a part of me that felt like, I hope I'm not being condescending. I hope I'm not too verbatim, repeating what they're saying. And so I worried about that, and it kind of took away from my ability to paraphrase.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that can be challenging because we don't want it to be so basic that it doesn't really feel like we're actually communicating anything. Right. But, and so, integrating those emotions, how you see that person feeling is often really effective for that. But yeah, it's something that you want to be really thoughtful about in terms of how you're paraphrasing them. But sometimes it's just wait a second, let me just make sure that I heard you right. And then you can say pretty much exactly what they said back to you, and it'll really make them feel heard. So there's a nice balance there. All right. So with that, I think that was a great conversation about the listening skills and the experience that you had. So I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, who is going to continue with the speaking skills. Or actually, I'm sorry. No, we have a quick break. We have a stretch break. So, but Carrie is going to be taking those speaking skills when we get back from that stretch break. So we do think that stretch breaks are important, especially when we're sitting in front of a Zoom screen for a little while. So I'm going to give you a quick musical interlude. It's called "The Way We Climb" by Judd Caswell. It's also part of our songwriting contest. So wait, gotta share my.
Looking at the mountain and it seems too steep to climb. Looking at the mountain and it seems too steep to climb. It takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of time. Put one foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other. That's the way we climb. Well, looking at the sadness and it seems too deep to mend. Looking at the sadness and it seems too deep to mend. Look into a stranger's eyes until you find a friend, and put one hand in the other, one hand in the other, one hand in the other. That's the way we mend. And looking at our differences, it seems too hard to love. Looking at our differences, it seems too hard to love. But everyone's the same about the most important stuff. Listen to each other, listen to each other, listen to each other. That's the way we love. at yourself, seems there's nothing you can do. Looking at yourself, it seems there's nothing you can do. But if you do the best you can, well, I will do it too. And we'll lean upon each other, lean upon each other, lean upon each other. That's what we can do. And looking at the distance, it seems too far to go. Looking at the distance and it seems too far to go. The road that leads to justice may be longer than we know. But put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. That's the way we go. Looking at the mountain and it seems too steep to climb. Looking at the mountain and it seems too steep to climb. It takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of time. Put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. That's the way we climb. Put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. That's the way we climb.
All right. Well, come on back, folks, and take it away, Carrie, and go ahead and unmute. And Carrie's going to lead us through speaking skills.
All right, everyone. So the speaking skills are next. And you can follow along with your speaking skills tip sheet in the participant guide. The first skill that we are going to talk about is using I statements, things along the lines of, this is how I see it, more often than assertions such as, this is how it is. So for example, a blue might say, from what I saw, there was no credible evidence that Democrats did anything to tamper with the 2020 election results. But they would not say, Republicans who talk about fraud in the 2020 election don't actually believe it and are just trying to justify their voter suppression efforts. That is more of a this is how it is statement. That is not the speaking skill that is going to get your ideas heard. Another way to express this might be to say, you know, I see Republican resistance to COVID restrictions as an attempt to find a better balance between caution and liberty. But they would not say, if we're following this I statement principle, the Democrats are just trying to use COVID to impose their vision of how the country should be on a scared population, right? So that difference there in how you use an I statement is about assertions. As part of this, when we're talking about the future, use some sort of variation. Rather than a definitive, this is what will happen, you can talk about, I'm concerned, or I'm worried, or I'm troubled about what will happen. So a blue example would be, I'm afraid we're going off a cliff on climate change and that there'll be no coming back. But not if you're using the I statement principle with variation, then you would not want to say, we are going to have to evaluate coastal cities before this century is over. These are statements that we hear, but they tend to produce defensiveness. So we want to go more for the I statement so that the person is able to receive your concern. A red example could be, I'm concerned that the first steps on gun control will lead to efforts to ban all guns in this country. But not, the anti-gun people won't stop until they take guns away from everyone. Right? Again, the I statements. Another area is to mention an area of similarity or agreement. This can take some creativity to be aware of, especially in the moment of a conversation, but it's very powerful. And it's good to look for this. Be aware it may not exist, or you have to go for very broad and basic human assumptions in order to be able to achieve it. So from a blue, you can look at something like, it sounds like we both agree that the tech giants have too much power in this country. Or you might say something like, It sounds like we both agree that Trump has tapped into real concerns of a lot of people. From a red, you might say something like, it seems like both of us see the media as dividing more than informing us right now. Or, I think we agree there's too much money in politics. Another principle is, before expressing disagreement, say some version of, I hear you. In a blue example, you might say, I hear that you don't trust the federal government to handle the COVID pandemic. My view is that only the federal government has the reach to coordinate the response to such a complex challenge. If we leave it to the states, the impacts from one approach spill over into the surrounding states. From a red, saying I hear you might sound like, I hear that you think that a federal response to COVID is the way to go. From my point of view, the federal government has a really bad track record of running domestic programs. It tends to use a one-size-fits-all approach. I prefer a more local approach that isn't overly restrictive and allows states to respond to the conditions in their own communities, which is better for the economy. Now, that pause that I put in there for both of them is a part of the acknowledgement sentence. That is intentional. That pause, after you say, I hear you, and then state your view, it allows a transition. It allows them to transition from having their viewpoint acknowledged and hearing yours. And it gives the other person a chance to acknowledge verbally, or non-verbally, that you got it right. So you'll see a nod. You'll see some sort of positive body language from them during that pause. It doesn't have to be that long. And when you go back and forth in this way between acknowledging the other person's viewpoint and then stating your own, it's much more effective than just restating your own position. And how often have we heard those conversations where somebody says their own position over and over and over again, and then it starts to escalate because of the tension? Instead, what we want is something like dancing and something like tossing the ball back and forth. You want them to be able to say yes to what you're saying to them. And then you add the and. So you're saying a yes and rather than a yes but. I hear you. And here's what I think about this. Both of those pieces are essential for a true conversation to take place. The next skill is to say something about the life experiences that have led you to be passionate about it. Personal stories are so important here. They humanize the issues. They make passionate political people come across as human beings who care. Something like, I've worked in healthcare my whole career. I've seen things that disturb me a lot. So you don't have to go on in a long story, but something about your life experiences. Another thing that you can do is to soften flat out disagreements by signaling first that your perspective is very different. Something like, it probably won't surprise you that I see this completely differently. And if you happen to get emotional on a topic, you can signal that also. Something like, this one is close to home for me. I have very strong feelings about it. That's okay to say. Now, we are going to do a demonstration again to make sure that everybody is clear on how we do these conversations. And we're going to have the same people help with a quick demo of what this looks like. I'll take turns playing the person who's practicing the speaking skills, and Liz will be role-playing someone as the opposite color, who's the actor. And for this demonstration, again, we're going to have 2 blue speakers. So the blue speakers should imagine that they're continuing a conversation about guns or immigration if you chose that topic. And do try to stick with the topic that you chose last time, because this isn't about the topic, it's about the skills. And this is going to be where someone has just shared their red perspective with you. And you're going to start by expressing appreciation. And then you'll continue by acknowledging your perspective. And then sharing your own view using I statements. And then the red actor will use the red talking points. You can even expand on them a little bit. But again, don't make it so forceful that your partner can't practice. Just measured pushback. So the red actor is not using the skills, so that the blue speakers have to work a bit to use the skills. And the blue speakers can then try using more of the skills like acknowledgement, mentioning areas of agreement, and continuing from there. So here's what that might sound like. Randy?
So Liz, I appreciate the opportunity to hear your views on this. And as you know, I come at this from a progressive viewpoint. I see gun violence as a huge problem in this country, and I feel like one of the biggest causes is too many guns.
Well, Randy, gun violence may be a problem in this country, but the Second Amendment gives people the right to own guns, and we shouldn't be in a rush to take away freedoms because of a few bad apples.
You know, I hear you. I agree that our individual rights are important. My own view is even if we have a right to own guns, there's no reason for assault weapons to be in the hands of ordinary people.
But if we overregulate gun ownership, bad guys will always find a way around that, and then good guys will lack self-protection.
Yeah, Liz, I can see that you're concerned about going overboard with regulations. I think that there are ways to be smarter about regulations, not just tougher.
So we would continue the conversation from there with the speakers using the skills and the actor pushing back. And similarly, doing another round from the other perspective. Now, we will go down to Randy is now going to be the red speaker. All right, Randy, go ahead and do the red speaker.
All right. Liz, I appreciate the opportunity to hear your views on this. And as you know, I come at this from a conservative viewpoint. I see gun violence as a problem in this country that needs to be addressed. I also believe the Second Amendment gives law-abiding Americans the fundamental right to own guns.
Well, personal freedom may be important, but one of the biggest causes of gun violence is that it's way too easy for the wrong people to get a hold of a gun.
You know, I hear you, and I recognize that some guns have fallen into the hands of bad people. On the other hand, if we regulate who can own guns and what kind, it feels like, to me, like steps toward taking away legitimate gun rights. It could leave good people defenseless.
Well, I realize that the Second Amendment gives people the right to have guns, but we can still have strong regulations that respect legitimate gun rights.
Yeah, Liz, I can see that you feel strongly about the need for more regulation. On my end, I'm deeply concerned about the rhetoric I hear about confiscating weapons from gun owners.
And we would continue the conversation from there with the speakers using the skills and the actor pushing back. And again, when we have the different partners, we will start out with Cassandra as the actor, you know, the first person so we get a rotation of two people who are going to play the speakers and one person who is going to play the actor in the first round, and then you swap it around. And we recognize that many of you may not be representing your own color during this role play. And remember that at 7 minutes, you'll switch roles and the new actor will review the talking points of a person of the opposite color from the participant guide, and the new speakers have the speaking skills tip sheet in front of them, right? So if you get really confused about any of these conversations, feel free to reach out for help. Now we are going to process what you've learned in the skills practice. We're going to use the same questions that we used last time. We'll start with what went well, and then we'll do what was challenging and take turns. And again, let's try to get some new people so we had some more people have an opportunity to participate. Remember to unmute yourself when you speak. And, you know, I want to say one thing about the what went well question. It's always a little bit harder to come up with what went well in any kind of endeavor. We're so tuned in to noticing the negative. And that's natural and effective in many ways, but there's something very powerful about also being able to give that extra minute to notice what went well. Which of these skills did we actually use? So I want to hold you to that for this first couple of responses. Think about what did you do of these speaking skills that really worked? Michelle?
Thank you. I think what went well was reflecting and then finding the common ground. Helped to broaden the thinking, and then a little bit beyond that, what really well was it created a space for us to have we used the script, but then it created a space for us to have a real conversation. It evolved into us being a little more comfortable to talk about real everyday issues and the impacts that they're having on us. So that was really neat. Excellent practice. Thank you.
Beautiful. I'm so glad to hear that. You mentioned areas of agreement as one of the skills that you actually used in there. And you had the expected response, which is that the emotions cooled off a little bit, the temperature lowered a little bit, and then your natural ability to converse came out. That's exactly what we're looking for. So thank you so much for sharing that. All right, Eileen, what went well?
Unmute, Eileen.
All right, we'll give you a moment there.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go. There you
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say quickly, the incorporation of personal stories. It was a really comfortable way to communicate. And I know when Michael used his personal story, it was very engaging.
That's great, because that's some of the tone setting skills as well. And we notice again how the tone setting skills change the temperature. Very good. Thank you so much. We had one more hands up there for what went well.
Was it Grace? Did you want to add something?
All right. That's fine. If you want to raise it again later, that will be fine. We will accept it. All right. Anyone else want to share what went well before we go on to the easier part? Push yourself a little bit. I know that you had things that went well. Linda.
I think the use of I rather than, you always do this or you do that, just saying, hey, my perspective, that sort of thing really softens the tone and lowers the defenses.
Oh, yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Linda. And Brian.
Yeah, I think we had really good listening skills in our group. So I think that really helped, that we gave each other a chance to, say our opinion and talk together. So
Can
good
you think
listening.
of which skills you used?
Was the listening part.
Mm-hmm. The paraphrasing.
Yeah, paraphrasing, and then.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for this. Reach for those things that you're doing well, because that helps reinforce them in the moment of these conversations as they come up. When we're confronted with somebody who opposes us in something important to us, we have a tendency to get emotional and forget the skills. So think about what's going well all the time. All right, now I'll let you talk about what was challenging. All right, what else have you got on your mind there from the things that were just really hard about this? What was challenging? Julia?
So I think that in our group, the thing we found the most challenging was, we got the listening, the acknowledging, the paraphrasing, the acknowledging, the maybe even finding the common ground. We managed that. But it was the next step of how do you say, but I disagree with you in a nice way, or I have a different perspective. Because if you found that common ground, it's like you don't want to immediately say, oh, I agree that there should be some, we agree there should be some regulations on guns. And the next step is, but if you think that there should be heavy gun control, then how do you move in that direction without kind of ending the conversation? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, that is perfect. That's a challenge that we do often have. And you snuck the answer in there. I could hear it. You said it one time and not another. So the key is to look for yes and. Yes, I do hear you that you think that this is a problem. And I have a concern about this. Right? And then you can say what the thing is that you were concerned about. Randy?
And one real quick, a real quick comment. So often in some other workshops, we emphasize a skill called pivoting, which is basically asking permission to offer a different perspective. And that could be very appropriate here. You could basically test whether that person is in the frame of mind to really hear you on your different perspective. So I think that's a good bonus skill.
Yeah, and if you're really concerned about this, really censor yourself from saying but, and push yourself to say what comes after the and. Yes, and I think this. I really think this. And then if you can remember the question, then I share with you what I think. That's what Randy was talking about, the pivot. Yeah. Stephen, did you have a comment about what was challenging?
More of a dilemma I had raised, but it had to do with when someone says, I feel that you are stupid. They're, they're, they're saying, I feel, and they're using an I statement, but they're using it in a subversive way,
Well,
non-understanding way. So what do you say to someone who follows the rules and say, I feel this and I feel that, but they're turning it around. You know what I mean?
Well, that is an excellent question, because it is possible to use all these rules and still that it's not just mutually exclusive for all possible ways of responses. So there are some difficult moments. And during these practice sessions, you've had the advantage of someone who's just role playing with you in order to practice the conversations. But in real life, things don't always go that smoothly. People don't always have your best interests at heart. So for some of those difficult moments, here are some tips. And these are also in your participant guide. Okay, so we don't start with your question, but it's in here. So first of all, one of the things that can happen is that they start to jump topics. As soon as you start to make some progress on one thing, suddenly someone is talking about a different issue. And if they do jump around from issue to issue, you can say, can we stay with immigration for now? Can we stay with, whatever your topic is for now? And you might have to remind them more than once, but that's okay. You can decide on a place to stop reminding them, but it's okay to ask for that, to stay with a certain topic. Another one is that sometimes people will ask baiting questions. And if they do, the proper response is not to answer. Instead, you just restate your viewpoint on the topic. So, for example, Blue might say something like, do you think we should let foreigners just pour into this country illegally and then become citizens? And a Red might respond, I think we need a responsible immigration policy that protects our borders, but is also welcoming, the way it was for my grandparents and lots of others. Or if, a Red is asked something like, do you think we should just round up undocumented immigrants? See, these examples. So, and the other person might respond, I think we have to make sure that our immigration laws mean something by enforcing them. And forgive me if I think the Reds and Blues on those examples were mixed up.
Yeah, it was the first example was a blue being asked that question. Yes, rather than saying.
Okay. Right. Okay. So if we have to, if we get baited, if we get asked baiting questions, the key point is to just restate what your viewpoint is rather than taking the question at face value. All right, another one is don't return provocative statements in kind. So if someone just kind of bursts out saying, Trump will go down in history as the worst president we've ever had, somebody who is a Trump supporter might respond with, there were challenges during his presidency, but I think that several of his policies were good for America. Rather than, do you think Hillary would have been a modern day Lincoln? Right, so that's an example from the last election. But if a Red says something like, Obama was a fraud on healthcare like he was on everything else. So instead of defending Obama's integrity or attacking Trump in kind, a Trump supporter could ignore the outburst and say something like, Obamacare needs fixing for sure, but I don't think the Republican alternative will be an improvement for most Americans. Right, so just don't return the provocative statements in kind. And then if, some differences are just so entrenched that you just don't see a way out, you can agree to disagree. You can decide that you're not going to continue the conversation and make a basic exit. And when you do exit the conversation, figure out ways to exit it in a low-key way. You can use humor, like, well, we really solved that one, didn't we? Or we can show concern. Like, I don't want to keep going and cause bad feelings between us. Or to the point, I think it was Stephen's comment, you could say that one felt like we're getting kind of escalated here. Let's talk about this a different time. Maybe we can find a different way of expressing that. Or you can just exit stage left. You can just say, gotta go. And then if you want to continue the conversation, you could say, to be continued another time. And the point is that not every one of these conversations is going to go exactly to script. Things don't always go well, and you're allowed to end it. And then we can come back and use a different kind of skill and see if it works. If people are in a better frame of mind, they may be able to be more receptive at a different time. It's a process that we're doing here, and not a single thing. There are a lot of habits that we have and that people are going to respond to us with. But nevertheless, if in general we are trying to use these skills and we get some of these kinds of difficult moments, it's still worth being skillful in order to open up future opportunities. So for our checkout question, we'd like to have as many people as possible take turns answering it just very briefly. Just give us 1 or 2 sentences. So the questions are, what are you taking away from our work today? And who would like to start us off? What are you taking away from this work today? Brian.
Yes, and not yes, but.
Great, I love it. More, what did you get? What are you taking away from our work today? Michelle?
Look for opportunities to find common ground.
Great, beautiful. Some more. What are you taking away?
Using I statements.
Ah, good. Thank you, Keith. Grace?
Being able to ask meaningful questions and continue to be curious, to make other people feel heard, and also to share my thoughts.
Both parts are necessary. Great. Thank you. Stephen, excuse me.
That you do evaluation forms. That discussions can be evaluated by the participants.
Oh, yes. Right. Evaluation is part of the experience. Right. Thank you. Yes. Some more? Get a couple more. What are you taking away from this work today?
And perhaps if folks want to think about how they specifically want to apply this to their work, that would be great as well.
Yes.
So Michelle had another comment?
I did, thank you. For me, the act of really listening and repeating back was really powerful, and I think just really gets us out of the frame of seeking to respond and really listening to understand. And so I just appreciated the practice of that and look forward to continuing to utilize that, because I really feel like it helped me truly better understand the other person instead of trying to catch them or prove them wrong. So
Thank you so much, Michelle.
And we just want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank the Braver Angels team for a phenomenal workshop. Thank you so much for all the work you did, Randy, in front of the scene and behind the scenes, and Carrie and Liz and everyone on the Braver Angels team, and all of you who gave us 2 hours of your day. We so appreciate you, and we're so glad that you were committed working with us to depolarize local government. We're so excited that you were able to participate with us today. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure.